כעת נשיא
And
המדינה
now the president
נכנס.
of the state of Israel is entering.
ברצוני להזמין את טל שלו לבמה. ברצוני להזמין את טל שלו לבמה לראיון עם כבוד נשיא המדינה, ידיד אמת של אוניברסיטת רייכמן במשך שנים רבות. הוא ואשתו מיכל ידידי אמת של אוניברסיטת רייכמן, ועכשיו טל, אני משאיר אותך לראיון.
The floor is yours for the interview. Wow, these glaring lights. It's too much. It's hard to see. Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, how are you feeling this morning? First of all, I'm delighted to be in the Herzliya conference, and I'd like to congratulate the Reichman University. I'd like to thank Vice President Jonathan Davis, my dear friend, and especially I'd like to thank Professor Uriel Reichman, who was my teacher. He taught me in the Tel Aviv University. If it's okay to mention this part of Professor Reichman's life, and I can tell you that I've been participating in this conference and coming to visit this university for many years, and I'm happy to see it developing, and I'd like to thank Major General in Reserves Amos Gilad, also a dear friend. Hello everyone and good morning. So let's start with the title of this conference, which is Vision and Strategy in an Era of Uncertainty, and Israel is indeed facing uncertainty on several fronts, on the domestic front, the external one, the security, financial fronts. What concerns you the most? You know, to start the morning with the question, what concerns you the most? Why don't you ask me what I'm most optimistic about? I think every person can and should be a realist and understand that any life circumstances at any times in any generations always include both threats and opportunities. And the more you learn about human history, about Israeli and Jewish history, you hear that you see that there are moments in which you seize opportunities, and other moments are moments of threat. And the thing that has been on the top of my agenda since I've assumed this office is to connect the different parts of Israeli society as much as possible, because we must understand that Israeli society is undergoing changes. It's changing. We are a 75 years old country, and societies change. They have changes, and some of these changes generate resistance and objections and threaten certain groups in Israeli society, and this culture of non-recognition, not understanding people who perhaps live 5 minutes from me, but they live very different lives, and they are interested in many other things, and perhaps some of them are very interesting. So I think the national task for all of us, and in this conference as well, and I suggest for the future, is to get to know better and thoroughly these communities and what happens inside them. I mean, every sector, every community in Israeli society is undergoing some internal changes and fervor. It's not true that they are all fixated. All communities, all groups face dilemmas between liberalism and conservatism. They all face issues of loss of the centralism of the state. They are all grappling with issues of social media networks that are changing human behavior in a way that we hadn't known in the past, and they're all dealing with issues of intergenerational gaps as well as differences in beliefs and views. So I see the Israeli society, and I consider to be a fascinating and interesting society with a rare mosaic that gives its capabilities, and of course within that you need to know how to define the structure of the field that everybody's playing in. Okay, so let's talk.
אז בואו נדבר באמת על החיבור שאתה מנסה לעשות בחודשים האחרונים בין תומכי הרפורמה למתנגדי המהפכה המשפטית.
זה לא חיבור, אני נותן חסות לדיאלוג, להידברות, לדו-שיח, ואני חושב שזה צעד מאוד מאוד חשוב.
השיחות האלה נמשכות באופן רשמי כמעט חודשיים, באופן לא רשמי אפילו יותר, 4-5 חודשים. עד מתי תיתן להם להימשך?
אז צריך להבין שהתחושת האינסטנט בחברה מודרנית, בוודאי בישראל, שבה כולם רוצים את התוצאה אתמול. קודם כל נכנסים לעימות וויכוח גדול, ואחר כך רוצים את התוצאה מיד. זה לא סכסוך עבודה במשק, שגם יכול לקחת חודשים.
some kind of a labor dispute. That could also last months, but we are talking about a process that addresses the root of our functioning as a democratic, multicultural country, which is also the nation state of the Jewish people on the one hand, but it's also multicultural. So it does take time. Nobody is dragging their feet, nobody's wasting their time. And in contrast to various spins, the discussions, the conversations are very serious, are very thorough. People come to the room with goodwill, and the relevant leaders who the people who sent them are in the room. They understand the need to reach a broad understanding, and we exert a great effort. It doesn't always have to happen in a plenary, in an open discussion. By nature of these discussions and any negotiations, these discussions are also held behind closed doors. Of course, we won't hide and conceal anything, and nobody is selling out on the basic values of this country. We have very thorough discussions about the separations between the powers, and this is how it should be, because for 75 years we did not address the issue of the constitutional structure and delineations and the status of the different players within this arena. It's fine, it's legitimate to do so, as long as we, of course, protect the tenets of Israeli democracy.
מסקרת את השיחות האלה, אין התקדמות בסוגיות המהותיות, ונשאלת השאלה, אולי הפשרה שאתה מחפש בסוף לא קיימת. יש צד אחד שמעוניין לבחור את שופטיו, וצד אחד שמתנגד לכל פוליטיזציה של בחירת השופטים.
אבל זה לא משחק סכום אפס, אני לא יכול להגיד לך בקביעה נחרצת שאין סיכוי, אני חושב שיש סיכוי, אני אומר את זה הרבה זמן, אמרתי את זה עוד לפני שהמשבר הגיע לשיאו, הפרמטרים הם מאוד מאוד ברורים, אבל מחייבים דיוני עומק משמעותיים, מדובר גם בתוך כל מערכת, יש גלגלי שיניים שפועלים.
In every system there are cogwheels at work, and I've said this several times. I'm not naive, I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because the alternative is much greater, much more serious, it's much more dangerous. And on the other hand, if we reach understandings, we can imagine how much it will strengthen this country and how much it can enable it to reach another 75 years in a stable manner that will enable proper social development. Look, people don't understand. I see significant advantage in the fact that there's a public discourse, the fact that there are demonstrations and protests on both sides. It's a source of pride for Israel that these demonstrations express a fierce democratic discourse, and I can tell you that I speak with a lot of historians with influence from all over the world, and many of them see an opportunity in this and not just a low point, and maybe it's good that it's happening now and not in 30 years. This is how we should consider this, because this is not a zero-sum game in the following sense that my value as a group is less than yours or vice versa. I'm in contrast of handing out grades to different groups. I'm in favor of sitting down and telling everyone, okay, you each bring your source of strength to the table, but the basic rules have to be maintained. It's a democracy, a healthy one, and it's an independent system. You've mentioned the leaders, but one should ask, do you believe the Prime Minister, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu? Because these hundreds of thousands which you mentioned that are protesting in the streets, they don't believe Prime Minister Netanyahu, and they also don't believe the dialogue process that you are sponsoring. I have to tell you that many of the protesters are indeed interested, and I'm sure of that. They want this process to succeed, and of course it's their prerogative to express their protest and their fears, and there's some basic distrust between all groups, one towards each other and in the political system in general, and this is a well-known phenomena. It's also quite understood, and yet I am not willing to give up on any account, and I think that it is the explicit role of the President of Israel, who's above the political system and above the public system, to be the place where, under his wings, they are sitting down and discussing thoroughly and seriously and with responsibility in order to build some long-standing foundations for the Israeli society without any time limit. Look, I don't work with a stopwatch. There are enough processes that are being measured in different points in time, and we're also exerting an intensive effort in order to ultimately bring solutions. And if you reach the conclusion that there is no solution, I'm not going to give you any details on a plan B right now. It's a terrible idea because any alternative is disastrous for Israel. You need to understand the magnitude of the situation and the extent and the scope of responsibility, and that means knowing to take brave decisions as leaders and to know that not everything is the most important thing in the world or a make or break, and we need to know how to respect and listen. And ultimately, and this is the most important thing, and I've said this and I'm repeating this, of course, if I see some malicious acts that were done to sabotage the process, I will not hesitate to point at that. Have you seen such malicious acts right now at this point? No. It's true that there are many elements outside the room, many factors who do not like the fact that we have this dialogue inside the room, but inside the room there is a serious, significant, responsible dialogue for the benefit of this country and this nation, and I see all parties coming there with goodwill. And the internal rift from the judicious overhaul is going into the rift between the ultra-Orthodox Haredi Jews and the secular Jews, and we see a liberal community, secular community that woke up following this judiciary overhaul, and we see the leaders of the ultra-Orthodox gaining power. What do you do about that? You know, some people here remember from their childhood some very fierce and violent arguments on issues of religion and state, and I'd like to say that I have severe reservations from the exclusion of companies, of groups, humiliating other groups. I think that there are certain statements said against the Haredi Jews that are completely erroneous and out of place, and I want all groups to recognize each other. And if I could encourage the school system and the Minister of Education, I would come up with various programs to make sure that children from all groups get to know other children from all other groups. And I'd like to say in this context that just as I've mentioned earlier, and there are some very lively discussions in all groups, so to make statements or comments that reject and generalize about others, it's a terrible thing. This is something we suffered from as a people, and we still suffer from. And still, this is a government that, as we're speaking, is starting to vote on the state budget, which includes coalitionary funds. And as top senior economists in Israel say that these perpetuate non-employment of the Haredi Jews. Of course, there's a public debate on that, and I don't think it's the place of the president to intervene because this is a political event. It's definitely a topic that's coming up, and I'm sure that it comes up in Israeli public life, and it will have an impact accordingly. Do you think that the ultra-Orthodox Haredi leaders are taking care of their communities? Look, I'm not here to judge any leader, but I've been working with the ultra-Orthodox Haredi community for over 25 years, and we need to look at this group from an evolutionary perspective and not from a revolutionary one. It's a very deep process that an entire group is going through. They do have their set of values, and they contribute quite a lot to the Israeli society in many areas that are important to us. And I respect the ultra-Orthodox community, and I can tell you I was a member of the Tal committee 25 years ago, and back then no one from the ultra-Orthodox community entered the security establishment. And the Tal law, it was a significant social process that also included a fierce debate inside inside the ultra-Orthodox community, not just in the secular community, because naturally, in such a process, each side wants to go back to the base, and the easiest thing is to say no to everything. But it did generate a change. It was rejected by the Supreme Court too quickly, too early, and it was a mistake because it prevented a more accelerated social process, and that includes other processes as well. So therefore, I think that in order to contend with the social process, we need to support it, to let it develop. And as Michal and I visit various parts of the security establishment and defense industries and other defense institutions, we meet there a lot of ultra-Orthodox men and women, but it's an outcome of a different process. So I think that when we approach this issue, we need to study it thoroughly. And I'm saying this to the ultra-Orthodox community as well. It's high time that you open up and get to know the lifestyle and worldviews of the general population of Israel, because this is how the world works. In order to have a country and improve it, you need to get to know all of its components and respect them. And what are you saying to the ultra-Orthodox leaders? I speak with them just as I speak with all the other leaders, and I'll keep to myself my conversations with them. Let's talk about other leaders. For more than 5 months, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has not received an invitation to the White House. There are some senior ministers in the Israeli government who are boycotted by the U.S. We just heard another denouncement from the State Department on Israel's policy. How concerned are you with the crisis with the U.S.? And I'm certain that the 2023 Herzliya conference will discuss this subject and hear diverse opinions. You were invited to speak in the American Congress. Yes, this is an option. This was done by a joint invitation from Nancy Pelosi and then Kevin McCarthy. So that's still in process. And it's important to say that the relationship with the U.S. is a very essential and strategic relationship for Israel. And of course, it's important as much as possible to maintain and foster these relations. There's an entire battery of visitors from the U.S. who visited the Israeli top echelon in recent months. And hopefully this visit is ultimately there will be a visit by the Prime Minister to the White House. What needs to happen for this crisis between the U.S. President and the Prime Minister to come to an end? Look, you're asking me to discuss political issues, and I do not wish to address these issues. The American administration, it's been reported, is interested in advancing peace with Saudi Arabia or normalization with Saudi Arabia over the next 6 months. I do think it could happen with this government as well. I think that negotiation and a political breakthrough, diplomatic breakthrough with Saudi Arabia is extremely important, and it has a tremendous impact on the regional balance. It's revolutionary historically, and I think that we need to promote a dialogue between Judaism and Islam. I think that the Abraham Accords is an excellent platform that generates a much deeper dialogue at this level as well, and I would truly be delighted on any progress with Saudi Arabia. Can there be progress with Saudi Arabia without any progress being made on the Palestinian issue? I think reality has shown us that it is possible to make progress in Israel's integration into the region without any absolute prerequisites about the Palestinian issue. And the facts prove that. The Abraham Accords are a fact, and yet it's important, it's always important to maintain a dialogue with our immediate neighbors, the Palestinians, and to find ways to make things calm down so that we can continue in our shared joint life. If we're talking about uncertainty or strategic vision, it's important to say that on the Palestinian issue, all Israeli governments in recent years are turning a blind eye to this issue. Look, we also need to look at the other side. It's very complicated. The Palestinian nation is splintered. It includes two entities. There is a process of political stagnation there, as well as a process at this point of waiting for the next generation. These things are quite complicated. Of course, it does not exempt Israel from taking whatever measures it needs to take, but it's important to bear in mind that when we have a society that sanctifies and glorifies terrorism, it's quite complicated. First of all, you expect your interlocutor to do whatever they can in order to reject terrorism in any form or fashion, and it's even a very serious thing, morally speaking. So that's the basic Israeli demand. We're just a few days after yet another campaign in Gaza, and also Israeli governments in recent years have not presented any sustainable solution for the situation in Gaza. Well, I wish to congratulate the IDF and the security establishment for exceptional activities that, of course, did whatever they can in order to prevent any kind of collateral damage, and also to hit some accurate targets and to strengthen the various components of the IDF's deterrence and the deterrence of the Israeli security establishment. Gaza, in and of itself, of course, we need to address this from a strategic, interdisciplinary perspective, and as long as Iran is behind the scenes as an empire that is pushing its various proxies in the region, then you have a very significant problem. It's a strategic problem. We have a strategic, historic clash or conflict with the Iranian empire of evil. We cannot ignore that. We cannot bury our head in the sand. We cannot carry on with business as usual as the Iranians are nearing a bomb, and they're doing everything they can in order to create some instability in the region. It's a tremendous challenge for all superpowers in the world and for the world. And of course, the focus is shifted to other areas around the globe. But of course, we cannot neglect this important development. One concluding question: the previous president spoke here 8 years ago, Uvi Rivlin, and talked about, and he gave the tribes speech. It seems that today we're even much more split than we were 8 years ago. Can you see anything that can bring us together? First of all, it's important for me to comment on yet another important group in Israeli society that I would like to place them at the top of this discussion, and that's, of course, the Arab sector, the Arab community, and especially I'd like to address the issue of violence, this bane of murders and violence that is especially the Arab community is experiencing. Not only them, the entire Israeli society is suffering from this, but mainly the Arab society. I think that this is a strategic threat that requires a thorough treatment, and it needs to place it as a top priority at all levels, whether it is a very centered and focused treatment, and also to have significant public empathy for a group of people who live amongst us, and they are undergoing this terrible suffering, and it means all systems must work together and collaborate to combat this without any excuses. And you cannot say it's impossible. We need to understand that these are terrorist organizations per se, terror organizations, and that means that we need to combat them as we combat terrorism. And I think that a month ago, or even before that, you told the government to have an emergency meeting. Yes, 80 people have been murdered, 80 Israeli innocent civilian citizens who were killed, and every day we hear about terrible, terrible incidents. And I suggest maybe we should invite an Arab family who will tell us what it's like to live in a village when they need to send their kid to kindergarten or to go through an entire night of shooting. And we need to understand that this is a strategy for the entire Israeli population. It's not just for the Arab sector, and it needs to be a top priority. If we're talking about the Herzliya conference that's examining national challenges, this should be the first challenge we tackle. And how come the government isn't doing that? Well, there was a serious group coordinated by Deputy Minister Yoav Segalovich, who was a former Lieutenant General in the police, and they would meet every week, several times a week, and they had some very effective results. And I really and truly hope in our conversations in the President's house with all these sectors and all the groups, I hope that there will be a project manager appointed by the government to address this issue. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.